Hi everyone, I'm back, and this time I'm going to be breaking down a few things I noticed in the fight between Canelo Alvarez and Daniel Jacobs. But before I do, let's first talk about the style of Saul Canelo Alvarez. Canelo is a defensively minded counterpuncher through and through, but not the type of counterpuncher who is also a stick-and-move pure boxer. Canelo is a short burst counterpuncher who does everything explosively. Now, since Canelo essentially chooses to do everything in such an explosive manner, his stamina simply won't hold up long term as a pure boxer, and a lot of small improvements he has made in recent fights has allowed him to stand his ground more, which allows him to conserve his stamina better and still remain defensively minded. And so the first example I want to talk about is how he occasionally cuts the distance by leading with his lead foot. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, the distance between two fighters is measured by the distance between the fighters' lead foot. It's not the head, not the gloves, or anything else. So with that in mind, Canelo would cut the distance on the longer Daniel Jacobs by stepping in with his lead foot and not bringing his whole body with it. This way he essentially steps into range but doesn't walk himself into a punch, since his head and body are still back. Notice here how Canelo forces Jacobs back by pressuring him, and he does this by inching his lead foot forward and not bringing his head with him. And once he gets Jacobs onto the ropes, he gets him to throw a jab that he could counter with a body shot. Now let's watch that again. Notice how Canelo is not eating shots from Jacobs, but he's still pressuring forward. He's still forcing him back, and there he forces Jacobs to use a jab that he could counter with a body shot. Let's go over exactly what Canelo is doing here. So first we notice that Canelo presses Jacobs over to the ropes, and notice how Canelo is still slightly out of his range based on the distance of their lead foot. Now Canelo cuts the distance on Jacobs, who is still on the ropes, by taking a small step forward with his lead foot. Also notice how his head and body didn't move any closer, and this keeps him safe. And so Jacobs noticed Canelo step into range and timed this step with a counter jab. However, since Canelo only moved his lead foot forward, he still had enough distance to not only see the jab coming, but also make Jacobs extend further than he probably anticipated. And this is defensive responsibility. Notice how Canelo doesn't get hit by this jab. He's able to see it and parry it. So let's go back to this exchange where Canelo presses Jacobs to the ropes once again, and notice what he does here. Look here how when Canelo steps forward, his lead foot cuts the distance on Jacobs, but he keeps his head and body back. And this is illustrated by the green line, which represents the position of Canelo's foot, and the blue line, which demonstrates the position of his head. So you notice that the distance between those two lines is very large, which means he's still cut the distance, but his head and body is still very far away from Jacobs. And so we see Canelo leans forward and brings his head into range to bait a punch from Jacobs, and Jacobs probes with his lead hand to re-measure the distance. Now that Jacobs confirmed the distance, he's going to shoot a real jab now. However, Canelo sees this and pulls his head back, making the distance between his foot and his head large again. And there we see Jacobs shoot the jab, and because Canelo pulled his head back, he was able to see the jab coming and make Jacobs reach with that jab. And this gave Canelo ample time to counter with a hard left hook to the body. A very effective strategy against counterpunchers who stand their ground like Canelo is to feint at them to expose a potential hole in their defense that you could capitalize on later. And Canelo demonstrates a very good way to deal with feints.
Nowy Jorku, jak mówił tam zawsze, Nowy Jorku, jak mówił tam zawsze, Nowy Jorku, jak mówił tam zawsze.
Now Canelo doesn't always bite on feints, but this time he completely bites on this jab feint and shows an opening to Jacobs. And now what is Canelo going to do? Is he going to stand there and get chin checked, get tricked, or is he going to do something else? Let's find out. And so before Jacobs can capitalize on the opening he exposed on Canelo, Canelo changes his head slot 3 different times in a split second. He pulls his head back, he slips his head to the outside, and then he changes levels down, he moves his head down to show Jacobs 3 different looks. He doesn't stand there and allow Jacobs to capitalize on that opening. He moves instantly.
W Nowym Jorku, jak mówił tam zawsze w Nowym Jorku, jak mówił tam zawsze, możemy oglądać ten pojedynek, na który możemy oglądać ten pojedynek, na który
Here Canelo falls for a body jab feint, but watch what he's gonna do next. And so Canelo takes an immediate step back and comes back with a level change, and Jacobs does an excellent job on picking up on this and immediately steps back while keeping his lead hand extended to avoid whatever Canelo is coming back with, and this forces Canelo to abandon this counterattack. Now I'm going to talk about some of the good things I've noticed from Daniel Jacobs in this fight. And Daniel Jacobs talked about in the build-up to the fight about how he planned to utilize the jab against Canelo and how it was going to be a key to victory for him. And for the most part, the jab did play a big factor in his success, definitely in the early rounds, and especially his use of the jab to the body. So we're going to take a look at that, and he also used it from both stances, orthodox and southpaw.
Skreślać, bo widzimy, że w momentach Daniel Jacobs.
In all of these exchanges, Jacobs set up a jab to the body by first shooting a jab to the head as a distraction. You see here in the southpaw stance, Jacobs touches Canelo's lead hand to keep it occupied. He's not looking to catch Canelo on the chin with this, he's not looking to knock him out, he's just using this as a setup. And then we see Jacobs switch his target to the body, and notice how he also changes levels and changes his head slots just in case Canelo tries to counter him. Here in the orthodox stance, Jacobs sticks his lead hand in between Canelo's gloves, and Canelo is in the high guard here, so by sticking his glove right between Canelo's gloves, Jacobs momentarily blinds Canelo. And then he shoots a sharp jab to the solar plexus where Canelo isn't defending because Canelo is stuck in the high guard.
walką jakie były na treningu Ryana Garcia, tego nie pokonane. Walką jakie były na treningu Ryana Garcia, tego nie pokonane.
And so in the very next round, Canelo adapts to this jab by adopting this lean forward, crouching position where he makes his head a much more inviting target, and it makes it harder for Jacobs to target his body. Notice how Canelo is leaning in, and this way it makes his head a very inviting target. That way he could slip the jab to either side and look for a counter. Having found a read on Jacobs' jab timing, Canelo attempts this hard left hook counter, and Jacobs does a good job of catching this hook.
Baldomir, który również swojego czasu, choć bez takich mocnych umiejętności, Baldomir, który również swojego czasu, choć bez takich mocnych umiejętności.
I really want to just break down this exchange for multiple reasons, but because there's a lot of good things being done on both sides, so I'm going to try to break down as much as I can with this. So a very important tactic in boxing is to show your opponent different looks, as this can be used to confuse them and not allow them to get a read on you. It also helps you lull your opponent so that you could launch an attack, or bait your opponent into giving you a counter punching opportunity. And in this one exchange, Canelo shows Jacobs an incredible amount of different looks, with this first one being a high guard with a neutral stance. Next he shows him a high guard but with a forward lean. Next he shows him a low lead arm, possibly to bait a punch. Next he shows him a Philly shell while leaning onto his back foot. Then he goes back to the high guard with a forward lean. Then back to the Philly shell. And then we see here, just as Canelo is about to transition back to a high guard with a forward lean once again, Jacobs attempts to catch Canelo as he's leaning in but this is actually just a bait from Canelo. So you see he slips this jab to the inside, and that sets up this counter right hand over the top. And so Canelo's right hand only grazes Jacobs, and amazingly Jacobs is able to counter Canelo for this by slipping his head to the outside of Canelo's follow-up punch and countering with a quick left hook. And so Canelo did an excellent job of showing different looks to create a counterpunching opportunity, and Jacobs also did an excellent job countering this effort from Canelo.
Baldomir, który również swojego czasu, choć bez takich mocnych umiejętności.
And now this video is getting pretty long, so I'll end it here with some closing thoughts. And this fight was very competitive, very close, but in a lot of the swing rounds where both guys could have won the round, you gotta look at who was landing more of the clean, effective punches, and whose punches aren't landing as cleanly. Most of the time Canelo was the one landing the clean shots, and Jacobs was throwing, but not landing. Jacobs had his best moments in the second half of the fight, where he fought from southpaw more often and outworked Canelo. However, when Canelo decided to ramp up his activity, he outboxed Jacobs almost every time. As always, if you liked this video and want to see more, please click the red button to subscribe. I'll see you guys all in the next one, and comment down below who you thought won the fight, how you scored it, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.